this lesson, we'll go into the art of reading water. You might ask, why do I need to learn how to read water? Or what do you mean by reading water? Reading water is finding the most optimal place that a trout inhabits where he'll be feeding. In many of the big rivers, no more than 10% of the water holds the fish, so being able to recognize where trout reside and feed will improve your success on the water. Trout look at 3 items when finding perfect nesting spots, also known as lies. Number 1, shelter. This could be a covered rock, this could be an undercut bank, or even deeper water or riffles that break up the surface area. Number 2 is the feeding lane. This is typically a current or moving water that brings the meal to the fish. Fish are very similar to humans. It's kind of like a drive-through. We're lazy. If we can go to a drive-through, we're going to take that over having to run half a mile just to get our cheeseburger. Number 3 is a holding ground, or a lie. This is a location with minimal resistance for current. An optimal location for trout is where they can hold their ground with minimal resistance, minimal flow of water, and they let the food come to them. This could be behind a rock, it could be in front of a rock, it can be the side of a rock. It could be in deeper water where the current above is moving faster than the current below. Look for areas that have slow to average pace currents with faster currents next to them or close by. So where do we look for these locations? Anytime moving water hits a solid object, it slows down the current and provides all 3 of the necessary ingredients for a trout's optimal holding grounds. When the water hits these objects, it creates what is known as a seam. As a fly fisherman, you're always looking for seams, the area where the fast water is next to the slow moving water. You can typically find any type of seam on the surface, and we're going to go over where to look for these type of seams so you can find the most optimal place to land that monster trout. The rock seam. These are easiest to find because you just look for a big rock. But there's 3 parts to a rock. You have the back seam, you have a side seam, and you have the front of the rock, which is called a pillow seam. The back seam, as you see here, the area behind a boulder or an outcropping rock, can be a good place to start when you're new. It makes for an easy target to hook your flies and land it at that seam feeding zone. You have the side seam. Just as easy of a target to learn, the side seam of a rock or a boulder. Instead of casting behind the rock, you cast up and above the rock and let it float down the side into that seam line. And then you have what they call the pillow seam. This is also known in the front of the rock. When water pushes up against a rock or a boulder, it slows down just enough for a trout to hang up on it like a wave, like it's surfing. When you spot trout in this location, approach with caution because they can spook very easily. We'll go into detail on hunting these monster trout in this scenario and then more of the advanced lessons. The next is a river bend seam. One of my favorite areas to fish is in a river bend. You can cover a lot of ground on these areas, typically holding larger amounts of trout, and it's just a good way to spend a good afternoon. We also have pools. This right here is the head of a pool. When fish are actively feeding, they'll gather at the head of a pool where the faster water is coming into the slower area. This area is perfect feeding zone with minimal water resistance. They can kind of hang back in that deeper area, and as they're feeding, move up to that faster water to get that oxygen. We have the tail of a pool. Just like the head of a pool where the water speeds up, at the end of a pool or the tail of the pool, the water does the same thing as it's leaving the area. Typically, trout like to feed in water that's moving at 1 mile per hour. These 2 zones are actually optimal locations for that speed. As you scale up the area you want to fish, look at the embankment in front of you and also look at the opposite side of the river. You're most likely going to find an undercut embankment that can hold monster trout. These embankments provide shelter and typically have faster moving water in front of them than they do inside of them. They're perfect hiding places from danger and offer fish easy access to dive out and catch a meal. When fishing embankments, always approach from the opposite side. Cast as close as you can and let the rig float as long as possible. We'll go into more details on different techniques you can use on these embankments in future lessons. A shelf seam, a few magical places find these shelf formations that are very similar to undercut banks, but they're under the water. Just like an undercut bank, shelf seams are great for holding grounds for monster trout. Depth changes. Look for areas that have a sharp depth change in the water. If the water is clear, look for darker spots in that water. Light can only travel so far through water, meaning that the darker spots are areas of deeper water. Throughout the year, holding grounds will change. A shallow area that has no fish during the day might be prime feeding grounds for monster browns at dusk or at night, when they have the cover of darkness to protect them from danger. In the winter months, the cold water slows down the fish's metabolism, so they find the area of the least amount of resistance to save that precious energy. Look for deep holes during this time. As water temperature rises, trout are going to move to areas with easy access to food. When the water temperature gets above 60 degrees, the oxygen level in the water begins to drop. So they're going to search out areas for shelter with well-oxygenated water, such as riffles or deep pools. The optimal water temperature is between 55 and 60 degrees. Brook trout and cutthroat trout do best in even cooler temperatures, while brown trout can withstand a slightly warmer temperature. Now remember, if any temperature gets over 65 degrees, we recommend that you do not fly fish. It's going to put way too much pressure on that fish, and you're most likely going to kill that thing if you do hook into him. Now, stillwater fishing, if you're interested in this, we're going to have some more advanced stillwater techniques in the members portal, so go check that out when you get a chance.